want to welcome everybody tonight to a special edition with a story of a man named Jason Pillow. I'm your host who's going to be asking Jason a series of questions. These questions will be tough. They will bring up memories. But we're trusting in Jesus to get Jason through this so that he can share his story to the world. So I'm your host, Jason Broadway. I'm from Watchful Eyes Opened. Listen to this brief introduction, and then we're going to jump right into it, okay? So the story you're about to hear, Memoirs from the Shadows, highlights a very real theme and story from someone named Jason Pillow. His and many other stories, sadly enough, don't get enough airtime nor credence of its existence in America or globally. These stories get pushed to the wayside of pure lunacy. But there is a sector in the underground world that exists in the shadows, committing atrocities against children for their everyday pleasure and for ritualistic fulfillments, to gain internal and eternal power for evil energy and sexual fulfillment. The dark forces at work against the light of the world has been going on for thousands of centuries. But for the children and people involved, there are real scars left behind for them to deal with, provided they make it out of the occult alive. Many people will automatically tune this out because it's too much or too heavy for them to digest in their minds and believe there is no way that this could happen in our world today. Trust me, I get it. Yes, it's heavy stuff. But being in denial of its existence does injustice for those who need healing. Contrary to the fact this dark world exists and wants to keep the lid on its evil occult, and anyone who attempts to expose it, they label or demonize as a fraud or even lunatics. Tell this story to the people whom I know that work with individuals daily to bring healing and restoration to their lives. While society has cast lots against them, we have a loving Savior who wants the person to be made whole, again from their fragmented parts. We were not designed to be split or fragmented, but to be made whole. You are about to go on a journey through the mind of Jason Pillow. He was the victim of a satanic or ritualistic abuse from an incredibly young age. The people or parties involved caused his mind to fracture. This fracturing in today's medical counseling field is called DID, dissociative identity disorder, formerly referred to as multiple personality disorder, characterized by a person's identity fragmenting into two or more distinct personality states. People with this condition are often victims of severe abuse. Now, I want to read this brief paragraph from psychologytoday.com. Dissociative identity disorder is a rare condition in which two or more distinct identities or personality states are present in and alternately take control of an individual. Some people describe this as an experience of possession. The person also experiences memory loss that is too extensive to be explained by ordinary forgetfulness. DID was called multiple personality up until 1994, when the name was changed to reflect a better understanding of the condition, namely that is characterized by the fragmentation or the splintering of identity, rather than by a proliferation or growth of separate personalities. The symptoms of DID cannot be explained away as the direct psychological effects of a substance or of a general medical condition. DID reflects a failure to integrate various aspects of identity, memory, and consciousness into a single multi-dimensional self. Usually a primary identity carries the individual's given name and is passive, dependent, guilty, and depressed. When in control, each personality or alter may be experienced as if it has distinct history, self-image, or identity. The alter's characteristics, including name, reported age and gender, vocabulary, general knowledge, and predominant mood, contrast with those of primary identity. Certain circumstances or stressor can cause a particular alter to emerge. The various identities may deny knowledge of one another, be critical of one another, or appear to be in open conflict. For Jason, listen up. I want you to take your time. Whenever you talk about this, if we need to pause, we'll pause and we'll come back for another time or another video. This is your story and one you need to tell the world to bring light to the fact that there are potentially millions more like you seeking help and don't know where to turn or whom to go to. At the end of this video, I will provide links to organizations whom deal with victims of SRA for anyone who needs help for deliverance and counseling. Jason, you wanted to say something before we jump in?
Yeah, two things. One, I'm under no delusions about the acceptance of what I am or what I've experienced within the Christian community. So I'm going to put it very bluntly. If you've ever read Dr. Rebecca Brown's book, He Came to Set the Captives Free, and had trouble and struggled to see how that story could actually take place and how it was real, then you're going to have immense problems even understanding my background or where I come from or the things that I've seen. If you cannot wrap your mind around the gospel and the Old Testament and the miracles within and understand that there are things that you cannot explain with the natural mind, then you're going to have problems. Two is a warning. I know who's watching. I know there's people spying on me, and I know that since I've decided to go public with this information, the coven responsible for me has been very mad about it and very upset. So I'm going to say this very plainly. One, I'm not looking to start a war or pick a fight. However, if you dare to bring your stuff back to my doorstep, I will come back at you. I do not want to. I want to live peacefully and happily with my family. But if I have to, in order to stop you from harming the ones I love, then I will.
About this right now, Jason, we're going to plead the blood of Christ over this situation, that no covens, whoever's responsible for making these threats, we cease it in the name of Jesus right now. We ask, Father, that you go bind it in your name, in Jesus' holy name. Amen. And we're going to claim victory for that one, Jason, okay?
Amen.
Brother, I've got a series of questions. I think this is going to be the best way for the world to know, to hear, and to understand, okay? And these questions are going to be tough, okay? And if at any point you don't want to answer them or move on to the next question, feel free, okay? I don't want to pin you in a corner or make anything make you upset and as you start to bring these memories to surface, okay? So first of all, here's number one question for you, okay? And I know that for me, and I mentioned this even in the brief introduction, that understanding an SRA was very difficult for me because, like you mentioned, I had to set aside the natural Jason and understand the supernatural side, okay? That we do serve a supernatural God, and there are things that exist that are unexplained. And there are evil things that exist from the demonic realm and from the satanic realm that bring curses on people and cause the mind to fracture from immense trauma and abuse. And for me to wrap my mind around all this was very difficult for me. But as the Lord worked with me to show me and understand how these things can happen, it started to paint a beautiful picture of why I guess I gravitate to you, because I just feel so much empathy towards you and the things that you went through, and being able to help other people like you is just an amazing thing. And I know that you've been working with a counselor named Colleen for some time. How long have you been working with Colleen?
Months. Several months. I'd be lying if I told you I could remember the exact date. I met Colleen in person at Brother Tom Dunn's conference that him and Brother Disdard put on up in Ohio on satanic ritual abuse. So that's been 8 months now.
Now, at that point, did you already know that you were a SRA victim?
Yes.
or were these okay? So these memories had already started to surface. You were
Yeah.
trying to seek some help.
Yeah.
Okay.
My memories started surfacing in 2008, roughly.
So how did you become aware that you were ritualistically abused? I mean, these memories just started surfacing for somebody, for an outsider like me trying to hear you. How would you explain to me how these memories started to come up?
It wasn't the memories that came up first. It was my understanding of the voices.
Okay.
Voices had always been there my entire life, childhood, everything else. I was in a car wreck in 2005 when I was at the peak of my career in the occult. At that point in time, I was high priest of the White Tower. I practiced vampirism, demonic summoning, etc., etc. Druidic magic.
So now let me pause right there. Were you consciously aware of what you were doing?
To a certain extent. To properly understand it, you'd have to understand that I have been being ritually programmed since I was an infant.
Since you were an infant?
Yes.
Wow. Now, were there other siblings involved, or are you the only child?
I'm not a child.
Give me a little bit of backdrop about your family growing up.
Well, the side that's responsible for it is the pillow side of the family. I've traced ancestry back to that since before the Crusades. There have been black magic practitioners all throughout the bloodlines, one after another. And it goes Irish, Scottish, the Druidic Empire, predating, the actual creation of Ireland and Scotland, when the Druids actually covered the majority of Europe.
Now, did this come from your dad's side, your mom's side, both lineages? Your dad's side.
Dad's side. My mom's side of the family, my grandmother her parents were German, came over here not too long after the Lebensborn Project had been put into effect over in Nazi Germany, when Hitler and the Nazis were actually rising to power. This was post-World War I. My grandfather, his descendants go back to Scotland. The farthest back I have been able to trace that to is post-Crusades. Now, on top of that, my grandfather's bloodline does have, Native American mixed in with it too, some basic shamanism and things like that. I know one of my ancestors on his side was actually the Archbishop of Canterbury at one point as well, so I'm still digging on that side of the family to find out why. Make no mistake, marriages and stuff don't happen by chance in that realm. They're arranged, even if the people aren't completely aware of what's going on.
You talking about, for example, with your mom?
Yeah.
Okay. Explain a little bit more about that. What are you talking about, prearranged marriages?
It all depends on the bloodline. They want to make unions that are going to benefit them in some way, shape, form, or fashion.
So your mom, maybe I'm jumping ahead. Your mom is fully aware of what happened to you?
Me and her don't speak on it very much. She's mentioned things to my wife and mentioned things to me in passing at this point that I have no doubt left on my mind that I was ritualistically conceived, that demons were involved, that I'm genetically altered compared to your average person.
Well, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. What about your father?
My father's multiple.
Your father is a multiple. Is he still alive today?
Yes.
He is.
Though I haven't had any contact with him in 6 years, something like that.
So in 2008, you said you started to have or started to understand what had happened to you. So how old were you in 2008?
2008, I was 24. I think.
24. Okay. And what were you doing at that time when you were 24 years old?
I had just gotten married to my first wife.
Okay. Now, did your first wife, did she start to see these experiences that were happening to you? Because you said you started hearing voices. I'm assuming that these voices were, well, I don't want to assume anything. You tell me what these voices were that you were hearing. Were these demonic entities? Were these...
No, not demonic entities. I said the voice had always been there ever since my childhood, but the way that I had been led through the occult my entire life, I had always assumed it was, demonic. I didn't have the realization that it wasn't until after I'd gotten saved in October of 2005.
So these voices that you were hearing, now that you know what they probably are, would be the multiple personalities?
Yeah.
Okay, so how many different altars did you have?
Still counting?
Yes. Yes. Do you have?
That I'm aware of, there's been at least 20.
How many of the 20 are healed?
Probably a little over half, but as I said, there's still some that show up that I don't know.
And these ones that have been healed, who healed them?
That was Christ. He's the only one who healed them.
Who's Christ?
Yeshua HaMashiach, the Messiah. Who else?
The Messiah, Jesus Christ. Wow.
So it's one of those things, my particular tale is one that, though what the covens had planned and intended, God sought to disrupt it from the beginning. However, it didn't exactly, I wasn't exactly free from the covens until late 2005. And even then, I still had to deal with them tracking me.
So for somebody listening to this, trying to wrap their mind around somebody who could have, well, what we call DID today, but multiple personalities. Tell me about some of these multiple personalities. Were they different ages? Did they have different language styles, writing styles? Could they perform different things? Tell me a little bit about that.
At least two of the personalities I'm aware of were programmed for assassinations, combat, that kind of thing. Then there were several child multiples, both male and female, that had been created during the ritual torture process, where my mind separated and they were developed in order to keep me from dying from mental strain.
Now, what was the youngest to the oldest as far as?
The youngest altar I'm aware of was 2 years old. The oldest child altar I'm aware of was 13.
What about the oldest adult multiple?
Wanted to say 62.
62 years old. So for somebody listening to this that doesn't understand the complexity behind multiple personalities or DID, basically you have something whole, right? So this is a whole part. This is Jason Pillow from the birth of Jesus. From the birth, the conception, God and two parents conceiving, right? And then this whole part becomes split. And so now you got all these fingers, we'll just say, or just think of it like a pie, right? So you got this pie, that's your completeness. And then in that pie, I'm going to start slicing it. The pie is still the pie, but those pie slices are now multiple personalities or different personalities consumed within you, right?
Yeah, let me put it in something that someone can understand. When you stand in front of a mirror, you see a reflection of yourself, right?
Yeah.
Body, the reflection is whole. It's a full image.
Yep.
Now, what happens when you take a stone and throw it at that mirror and it shatters?
Becomes cracked.
Falls to the ground. Yet each piece still holds part of your reflection.
Very interesting. I know there was a Hollywood movie that tried to portray this from the horror side by the producer M. Night Shyamalan called Split. I don't want to endorse that movie at all or say anything, but very, very interesting how the mind can fracture like this. But I want to go back. Let's go a little bit back into your childhood. You mentioned that this was from infancy, you being abused ritualistically. Do you remember as you started to get older as a child, things happening to you?
Bits and pieces. So there's still a lot of memory that's not there.
Give me one of the memories from a childhood, if you would so be willing to talk about. Take your time.
What age?
I don't know. I don't know. What age would you have remembered? Let's say, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years old, somewhere in that time frame. You should have enough intellect at that point to be able to understand things. Of course, the mind can remember things all the way from early childhood, as I've known when I went through classes for child adoption, as we learned about child abuse, that memories can surface from a very, very young age, beyond 2 years old.
Yeah, the oldest one I have is 2 years old. One year during Beltane, how do I describe it?
What is Beltane?
Beltane's Fire Festival. It's 1st of May. It's used for ritualistic sacrifice and ritualistic programming. Beltane dates back to the Druids and even beyond that in certain cultures. It just goes by a different name depending upon which cult it is you're looking at. Babylonian, Sumerian, etc., etc.
So as far as that memory is concerned, can you share on that a minute?
Trying to think of the best way to put it. Parts of the memory that I've regained, I still don't have the full amount of time. There's still time parts that are missing because other altars still hold those time frames. But I remember that I was Jason Bourne and then moved to another location. For those that don't understand what I'm saying, I apologize because that's the way that I refer to it between me and my wife because she knows what I'm talking about. There was another person that was brought up beside me within the coven as far as programming and stuff like that goes. And he was on one of them. I don't know if it was deliberate or if it was just because he was different than the rest. But, during the training or whatnot, when I would be beat or things like that, he would pick me up and tell me not to allow them to see my pain and things like that. He was somewhat encouraging.
So were there other children?
Yeah.
There were other children. Boys, girls?
Both.
Both.
The girls, their programming starts at an older age because they're easier to break down mentally. Boys, however, it usually starts from infancy or a very young age.
Now, when you talk about breaking down the female or the male, whichever one they're trying to break down, do you have any memories of some of the things they did or used, or when they start breaking you down? Can you expand upon that? Like, were there voices, were there lights, were there torture devices? Tell me. I don't know.
Electroshock treatment, or well, that's what they call it in the psychological field. It's just another torture process.
So literally, you were shocked with a device?
Yeah.
For how long? Like, I mean, would these shocks, how long would these shocks last? I mean, would they just during the ritual ceremonies or during the programming, I guess?
Yeah.
Would you cry? Was it painful?
Yeah, of course it's painful.
Where would the devices be attached?
Head, fingertips, arms, feet.
Would they say anything to you?
The programming would go, I would be placed in a chair, steel chair. The lights in the room would be blinding. Couldn't see who was in there. All you could hear is a voice or whatever audio they were using.
So the room was what? Pitch black?
Couldn't really tell. The lights were so bright they surrounded you. You couldn't see what room you were in.
Okay, so the lights were very, very bright. Okay.
They would ask a question. If you gave them the right answer, the shock would be brief. If you gave them the wrong answer, it would be long.
Do you remember any of these questions? What would be a typical question they would ask somebody?
It would depend on the purpose that you were going through it, which multiple it was they're trying to program.
Would there be other people in the room with you?
There would usually be 2, maybe 3 in the room. One would be asking the questions, the other 2 would be controlling the lights and the actual electro torture.
Was this in... Do you remember the place of where you were at? Like, was this in a hallway, in a special room, in a basement? And
it was a hospital here in Memphis.
So a Marine hospital, the one that in the intro video to the trailer to your story, the very first picture that shows up of this brick facade building, you talking about that one?
Yes.
Okay. And there's other various... Go ahead.
This is a ritualistic hotspot because it's right next to the river and it's very easy for them to dispose of the bodies.
You mean that there have been people who have been killed during these ceremonies?
Yes.
And what would be the purpose of that?
Ritualistic slaughter, most of the time. Sometimes it was to prove a point or to make an example out of someone that stepped out of line.
So if another child was stepping out of line, they would just end their life?
Yeah.
Wow.
A lot of times they would use one of the other children to do it. That's what I mean by the term I was Jason Bourne.
Understood. Several other pictures that are in the intro video. One shows this staircase and it has this, well, of course, the pictures were taken during a construction crews are trying to give a little backdrop about that. You would know more about this. I could tell it, but go ahead.
This particular property has been purchased and attempted to be renovated. I think this is the 3rd or 4th time they've attempted it, and it never lasts because the people that are over it usually run out of money very quickly, and the construction crews quit very quickly as well because of the demonic activity within the building.
So there's strange paranormal going on at this land plot this old Marine base that wants to be converted into some type of apartments or condos or something?
That's what they're trying. The base was built during the Civil War, and they desecrated Indian burial grounds in order to do it. There are 2 mounds that are right next to the building. One of the mounds was tunneled out and gutted in order for the Civil War troops to store munitions, cannonballs, powder, things of that nature. There are underground passages from that lead to the other building, though some of them have been sealed up. But there are also other underground passages from the building to the river.
Well, hold on. Were any of those passages operating during the time in which you were abused at that place?
Yes.
So these tunnels were fully functional and operating?
Yes.
That's how they would transport you from location to location?
Sometimes.
When was this facility shut down?
I would have to ask my friend Taylor that one. She knows more about the actual ins and outs of the construction crews that have been working on the building and such. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the building itself was shut down. The first renovation attempt was sometime around 05 or 08, possibly. I'm not 100% sure.
So at what age can you remember being programmed at that facility?
I have memories of that facility from the age of 3, 7, 8, 9, and about 14.
So how old are you now, Jason?
35.
So potentially some of these memories are from the 80s, I would assume?
Yes.
90s?
Yes.
Okay.
I said the images that you see in the video, the wide panoramic view of that room that has all the pillars and stuff in it, the foundations, the floor in there and that hallway were whole. The last time I was in that building taking pictures was when it was under construction, and they had cut out sections of the floor to lay new piping and electrical systems.
Yeah. You can see, I think in one of the pictures, it looks like they had those cutaways for that plumbing and electrical going on.
Exactly.
Very, very interesting that there's been 3 different contracting crews there who've attempted to renovate the building and have come across paranormal activity. Now, the other pictures in the intro show this mound, and you talked about that, and you said that was what?
There are 2 mounds on location.
Two
One
mounds.
was a burial mound. Yeah, one of them was a burial mound that was desecrated by the Civil War soldiers. The other was a ritual mound.
What is a ritual mound?
A ritual mound is a mound that is used by the shamans and the medicine men of the tribes to actually perform rites and rituals and passages. It's also used for ceremonial dances and things like that.
So this was an old Indian burial mound. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Gotcha. Let's go back for a minute, and I want to go back to the Marine base, because you're talking about being strapped to a chair, intense bright lights. I guess it would have a blinding effect where you wouldn't be able to see, almost like you walking down the road and a car coming in with their high beams. How it would have that blinding effect for somebody who doesn't understand. That's why I'm asking these questions.
Yeah.
Is that the type of sensation?
Yes.
Were there other noises going on? Did they have any music playing? Did they have, or was it just the voice of the handlers?
Sometimes they would use music, sometimes they wouldn't, and it'd just be the voice of the handlers.
So they would ask you a series of questions, and if you didn't answer a question, I guess, that they liked, what would happen?
They would shock you.
How long would this shocking last?
As long as they felt you could take it without going out.
Do you ever remember screaming, crying? Or could you hear other children crying, screaming?
You could always hear other children crying. The only way that you wouldn't is if they put them in the isolation room.
That would be my next question. After you got done the shock therapy, and what would be the purpose of them doing this? To break down your mind?
Yes. It was a process to put you back under programming.
So where would they take you afterwards?
Said it would depend on the age. A lot of the programming I went through when I was young was done in brief instances. Of course, I was a lot easier to break down at that point. Older, it would last, sometimes days.
Days in that room?
Days to reestablish the line for programming.
So literally you would be in that room for days on end. Sometimes. What about, I know these are silly questions, but I mean, for me as an outsider looking in, I think about all these things. What about, did they feed you during this time, or was there if you had to use the restroom, what would happen?
Dehydration's used. You gotta use the bathroom, I guess you better learn how to use it on yourself. They don't care.
So a lot of times you would desecrate on yourself. Urinate on yourself.
Yeah. They'll strip you, if you're a child, they'll strip you down to nothing and throw you inside of a coffin and dump spiders and snakes in there with you just to break you.
Hold on, tell me about that, Jason. So they'd strip you down butt naked?
Yeah.
And put you in a coffin?
Yeah, and then whatever it was that they felt activated your fear the most, they would put that in there with you.
So these were fear tactics to
break down the mind, to cause it to split.
Once they started splitting a mind, what would be the purpose behind that? To try to control somebody?
Yeah. The entire purpose is to cause your mind to snap, to cause the person that's you to go into your subconscious and a new personality be created.
So let me ask you a question. Going back to your mother and father, do you remember riding in a vehicle? I don't want to plant any kind of scenes in your mind. I wanted to ask, I guess I should be a little bit more cautious to ask the questions instead. But do your mother and father, do you remember going in a vehicle? Did they drop you off at the base? How did you get to this facility, I guess, would be my question. Do you remember any of that? How you would end up at this facility?
The way they would do it is they would activate one of my altars, and depending upon my age, I would either be taken from somewhere or I would be picked up after my altar had managed to sneak out of the house, and I would be carried to the facility.
Do you ever remember your parents taking you to this facility? Were they together at this time?
No. No, they divorced not too long after I was born.
Did they divorce because of what your dad was doing? Who did you live with?
I lived with my mother.
You lived with your mother. So, did your dad have any kind of visitation rights?
After a while, no.
So, at some point in your early childhood, he did have visitation rights to you. Is this when the programming would occur?
To be honest, I don't have those answers.
Okay.
Because I was never able to get him to answer anything. I just know that I know what I've heard from my mother. I know that I exhibited traits that no 2-year-old should have had, and abilities that supersede the normal.
Give me some examples.
At 2 years old, my mother had done a birthday for me. And, they had balloons and everything else. And she had got me a toy gun. At 2 years old, I was able to take that toy gun and pop 3 of the balloons consistently, one right after the other, with that gun.
So this gun had little BBs or something?
Yeah.
Okay, so you were already learning some type of military training, firearms training?
I said, and the only way that can be done at that age is through programming. So,
through this programming, at that age, Potentially. Now, I'm just asking, could a older multiple been able to operate something like that through a child?
Yes.
Were any of these multiples, Jason, because you said up to 20 that you know of, more potentially still exist as you're getting healing currently? Did any of these altars or multiples, were they demonically controlled?
Yes.
All of them?
Not all of them.
So not all of the multiples were demonically controlled?
No. The important ones are always given call signs, indicators, certain tones, frequencies, words, set in a specific order can activate them. Demons are usually used to keep them obedient and to keep them in place.
So demonic entities, demons, would control or want to control the different multiples within you,
Yes.
to get them to do whatever bidding, whatever sick, twisted things they want to do.
Yes. For the longest time, I thought that the memories that I regained were, from my subconscious when a demon was in control, but that just wasn't the case. It was memories from altars.
Let me ask you a question. Could a demon try to speak on the behalf of a multiple and try to suppress the multiple from speaking and
Yes.
it act as a multiple? So that
Yes.
happens.
Yes, it does.
You said there was no other siblings, just you, only child?
Yep. The only other sibling that's ever been in my life, besides my adopted brother, is my stepbrother. And he lived with his mom, so he wasn't around very often.
Going back to your childhood, Jason, going back to the Marine base, were there ever any satanic rituals performed where it involved a sacrifice, blood drinking?
Yes.
What would be the purpose of that?
Power.
So, this is hard stuff. So, do you ever have any recollection of someone being murdered and their body being drained of its blood and somebody participating in drinking of the dead person's child's body, adult? I don't know. Tell me. Were these children? Were these babies? Were these grown people? Were these homeless people? I don't know.
Any and all of the above depends on who they've come across and who they've deemed worthy of sacrifice. One of my first memories that resurfaced was a black mass ritual. And what aspects I was there in, I don't know. I know it was one of the rituals. I was there when I was older. I must have been at least 16, if I had to guess. Maybe 18. I don't know if I was there as a participant in the ritual or if I was there as like the bodyguard or whatnot for the high priest, because at that time there was a lot of tension between the high priest and his second in command.
What would be the second in command? Did he have a name? She, he?
It was he. And to be honest, I can't remember his name.
Were there other organizations involved? Let's just take, for example,
Lodge.
Go ahead.
Masonic Lodge. The Druids in this area practice alongside with the Freemasons on a regular basis. They also have loose connections and affiliations with the Brotherhood. As a matter of fact, there's a war brewing right now between the new high priestess of this region and the elder of the Druids that actually responsible for my programming.
Why would a Mason want to be involved in something like this?
Power. It all comes down to power. They're power hungry, just like everybody else is. Whether it's to fill their own twisted perversions, their own sociopathic desires, or whether it's just for them to gain political connections.
How did you know they were Masonic organizations involved? Did they have rings? Did they have? Were they wearing certain things? I know the Masons wear the.
My programming happened in lodges, so.
You're saying, hold on. So you're saying some of your program happened in Masonic lodges?
Yes.
How old were you?
Young. 6, maybe 7.
And would the high priest of the coven be there with the Masons, or was the Masons just had you by themselves, or how did that work?
Well, you have to understand that my great-grandfather himself was a 33rd degree Mason, just as his father and his father and his father, going all the way back to General Pillow during the Civil War, who was very, very good friends with Albert Pike and helped to rebuild the Masonic lodges after the Civil War.
So you know a little bit about this Albert Pike fellow?
Yes.
What about, besides your father, what about, did you have any aunts, uncles, or anybody else grafted into the coven organization for the abuse?
To my knowledge, my father was the only one out of his siblings because he was apparently deemed special.
What about your grandfather? How did your father? Do you know anything about how your father?
I'm almost positive my grandfather was DID as well.
So probably multi-generational fracturing, programming, abuse going on here.
Yes, from what I've learned from some of my great-grandfather's friends, including lodge members, and even his widow, I have strong reason to believe that he would take her to certain gatherings of the Masons and either drug her or put her under some sort of mind-altering control, and they would have their way with her.
And who is this again?
This is my great-grandfather's last wife.
Speaking on drugging, do you have any memories of being drugged? I know. Well, go ahead.
The only time that drugs are used is if it's going to help break down somebody's psyche quicker. You know, in that case, they will use acid, LSD, things like that, strong psychotropics. However, that can also be counterproductive because it can cause the mind to completely break, and then whatever happens, they have no control over it. Right.
So the drug would have control over that splitting versus them having that control.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
And then you could end up with property that's permanently damaged and is of no use to anyone.
During the chair times at the Marine base when you were younger, did they ever sexually abuse anybody?
Yes.
Males and females?
Yes, both.
Both.
Torture and rape was one of the ways they would break people.
Can you talk about, what do you mean torture and rape? Obviously we know what rape means, but torturing of young boys and girls? Like sexual torture? Having contraptions, devices?
Yes.
To inflict pain upon the genitalia, or
it depends on the programming they desire.
Did they ever brand or mark anybody?
Very rarely. If they did, it would be in the form of a tattoo. And they usually only did that with people that were being sold into the sex trade.
So, hold on. So some of this programming these young children would be funneled out to buyers on the sex market?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
How many different children do you remember coming in contact with that were part of this programming? Was it like a core group of kids and you really didn't extend beyond that, or were the new kids being brought in all the time? Or
The time that the kids would have any interactions with each other is if it was during pit fights to establish whose prodigy was better.
so would there be other people around watching this pit fight go on?
Yes.
Almost like two roosters going at it in a cage? But sick people would use you and others to fight each other?
Yes.
How long would this fighting last?
Usually until one of them was dead.
You guys would fight to death.
Yes.
Do you remember being battered and bruised by another opponent?
I remember being hit. I remember the fights. I remember
Were there weapons involved or just fists and kicks?
it was fist. Sometimes it would be daggers.
They would throw daggers in the cage?
Yes.
Cage, pit, what is it? Can you describe that?
Well, they were always referred to as pit fights. They would happen at different locations. Sometimes it would be at a ritual site in the middle of the woods. Sometimes it would be at an underground facility. Sometimes it would be even at the Marine Hospital.
How many people would be standing around watching this go on?
Anywhere from 15 to 60, depending upon what ritual it was and whether or not more than one coven was involved.
So this is not like a rooster fight where there's money being exchanged, was it?
No.
No. No money involved in this.
No, it was always either to make an example of somebody as punishment or between two factions to see whose programming was superior.
You mentioned you guys would fight to the death. Did you always have to fight to death?
No.
For the children that, let's just say the fighting rink, and a child had passed away, what happened to the body?
It would either be burned and the rest of the remains buried, or it would be dumped into a river or even a well, depending on the location.
Do you ever remember being a part of that?
As far as actually being a part of the disposal, no.
Yeah. How do you know this being in a well or dumped in a river? How do you know that this is how they would dispose of the body?
Because I've seen it happen.
You've seen it. What would happen while they were watching you guys fight? Were they laughing? Were they mocking? Were they egging it on?
Yes. They would laugh, they would mock, they would make bets with each other.
So there were some internal money exchanges going on?
No, when they bet lives.
Bet lives, gotcha.
It's usually favors for favors or information in exchange for information.
Jason, there's so many more questions I want to ask, and we're already nearing the hour mark. So the time happens so fast when you're talking on these things. It really does. We're going to have to do a part 2 to this series because we're just scratching the surface of some of the things that you've been through. There's so much more to talk about. And that needs to be told. I'm really trying to process a lot of this information, Jason. So if I look like I'm looking off and kind of reading some questions that I have, I'm also trying to process some of the conversations that we had already. I guess for the remainder, a couple minutes, just to stay focused on the time frame at the Marine Corps base as the child. I know we talked about after they would get done doing the shock therapy, you and the others in the room, where would you guys be taken afterwards? Were you I mean, you would think that there would be.
After that, I would usually be dragged to the isolation chamber and placed in there.
And how long would you stay in the isolation chamber?
Sometimes hours. It was a process used to break down because you can't hear anything, can't see anything. You know, it's a chamber that's designed to be completely void. There's nothing.
Now, did you go to a public education for your education? I mean, were you part of the public institution? Were you private schooled or
public institution?
So, going through this abuse, you would think that there would be physical marks on your body from being in fights, from being in.
Always ways around that. First few years in my youth and everything, they would use magic to actually heal those things, so there wouldn't be any marks or anything else. Teenage years and whatnot, I was always involved in extreme sports, you know, skateboarding, stuff like that. So there was always reasons for me to have certain markings and things of that nature.
Do you ever remember missing school for an extended period of time? Would this happen on weekends, evenings? Only during special occasions?
Most of the programming would be done on actual ritual dates, which the vast majority of those take place when school's not in session.
So would most of the heavy programming happen at a very young age? You wouldn't have been in school at that time.
Exactly.
So as you got older and got into school, at this point, you're already fractured.
Yeah.
Correct?
Correct.
So now they've got control over you, correct? So now they wouldn't need to do the intense fracturing because that was already done at such a young age. Is that correct?
Exactly. That was already done. The only thing they would have to do from that point on is maintenance.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was alluding to, is that as you get older, it would just be kind of like some program reboots, like we have a CPU, you know what I mean? And we have all these updates. That's what they're doing to you, basically, in the realm of the natural, is kind of doing the rebooting.
Exactly, rebooting the system and making sure that compliance and obedience is still practiced.
So young minds are developing rapidly. I think the mind, I forget what the age is, I think it's in the 20s of when it actually, as it continues to develop, but there is that span where at a very young age, I don't know, 6, 7 years old, anyway, where the huge developmental years is what it seems like. What you're telling me is that during these huge developmental years at the younger ages is when they do this heavy programming and cause this fracturing of the mind.
With men, yes. That's because guys are psychologically different to females. It's a lot tougher to break a male child once they're a certain age. So ritualistic programming, DID, things like that have to take place in a male child from a very young age on. Otherwise, it's pointless and they might as well just be a ritual sacrifice.
Going back to, I'm kind of bouncing around a little bit because it's a lot to take in, and I don't have blocks of time, you know, to be able to capture all this, but we're just trying to hit a lot of the highlights for the audience, and so that people can hear the atrocities that have taken place to a human being. I know many are probably going to scoff at this and laugh at this and not even want to entertain the idea, but to those who walk in this realm, who understand this realm, who counsel, I know people who counsel in this realm, they can tell you stories of what people have been through, horrible abuse. You're talking about what we know of child abuse through the DSS system to the 10th power, and then you add in ritualistic, satanic rituals being done as well. It's hard, I understand, it's hard for us to grasp this concept that they could do this to another human being. Very tough stuff. I've got more stuff I want to talk about, but like I say, we're already hitting the 1 hour mark. So Jason, we're going to end this series and do a part 2. Are you okay with coming back to do another part?
Yeah.
Is there anything you would like to say before we end to somebody watching this very first part and they've heard a lot? I mean, it's like taking a huge 101 crash course at a college and taking it within an hour, and we're jamming all this information really, really fast about multiple personalities, about DID, about programming, ritualistic abuse, and then you're having somebody like yourself telling your story, and I'm asking you a series of questions. What would you want to tell somebody who's watching this? What would be the purpose of you coming forward about this?
The reason why America is being destroyed, the reason why the churches are being destroyed, is because the church doesn't understand the enemy. They don't know the enemy. They don't know how they work. Most pastors won't even preach or teach on it. It's high time the church stops hiding from the truth. As long as the church continues to bury its head in the sand and say, oh, I don't believe that, oh, that doesn't exist, then we're going to continue to watch the destruction of innocent lives happen around us. Do you think that God won't hold you accountable?
So somebody who's been fractured as yourself.
Someone that's been fractured like me, Christ is the only way out. Only Christ can provide the healing that you seek. I know people that are SRA, like myself, that have spent the last 15 to 20 years with therapists and psychologists and are just now getting to the point of healing that God has already brought me to.
I think too, Jason, now this is my opinion, that these psychologists, these counselors in the doctorate field levels only push the envelope so far, and so they leave people like you fractured because they don't want to step into the religious realm. Okay, we'll call it that, the religious realm. And they know that something else exists, and they probably even know that there's demonic possession going on or demonic entities controlling your multiples, and they don't know how to break past those barriers. That's when special counselors like Colleen and Sherry and Russ and people and Tom that operate in this realm can come in from a Christian standpoint, provide a solution through the blood of Jesus, and Jesus does the healing, because really all we are instrumentations, vessels, right? Willing to listen, to hear, to talk to, but ultimately through all of this, Jesus is what I'm hearing. Jesus is the ultimate healer for each of these multiples.
There's a reason why God is referred to as the great physician. You know, how can someone that specializes strictly in the natural go into the spirit realm and free a part of your soul for healing that's being held by demons in a realm that they're not even willing to admit exists?
Right. And so as we leave this first part 1, because I'm going to have Jason back, this is his story, there's so many more questions we need to ask in the part 2 to tailor off of this. I want everybody to really think about what was being said. I know it's hard to digest, but in the end, somebody who has been fractured, somebody who has been split, The ultimate healing comes from Jesus Christ. No matter what happens in a fractured life, Jesus can and will heal a willing soul to make them whole, to make them complete again. Is that what I'm hearing, Jason?
Yes.
Are you starting to be put back together by the Almighty Jesus Christ?
Yes, piece by piece.
Your brokenness is being healed by Almighty God. What was meant for harm, what was meant for pain, what the enemy was gloating and laughing at, your demise, the Lord Jesus Christ is putting back. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's exactly what you're hearing. And for those out there that are listening to this at RSRADID, seek out people like Colleen, seek out people like Tom Dunn, seek out people like, my wife that can help guide and counsel you through Christ for healing, because, the coven's afraid of a healed SRA victim. They're terrified of people like us because we are the ultimate weapon against them. We know how they work. We know how the rituals work. We know where they're doing these things. We know who's involved, and they are terrified of that.
Are they terrified of Jesus Christ?
Immensely.
Because why? He holds all the power?
Yeah, there's been several coven members that have attempted to attack me that God has bound spiritually. They can't practice ritual magic anymore. They can't do anything.
So what you're saying is that he's placed a hedge of protection around you, a spiritual hedge of protection.
Yes.
Folks,
He's the reason why they haven't attempted to come after me worse than what they have.
And so all the glory and honor goes to Jesus Christ, because he is, listen to me, he is the one that holds the keys of death, of life, of healing. And you're listening to a fractured soul being put back together from horrific atrocities. Like I said, I know many's going to scoff, many's going to laugh. They're going to say that we're making all this stuff up. But to somebody who operates in this realm, we know the truth and we know the Savior that we serve. So Jason, we're going to stop right here and leave it in this part 1. We're going to come back and do a part 2. So folks, bear with us in the next week or two as we plan out the part 2. Take time to digest, take time to pray, take this to the Lord in prayer. And let him speak to you personally about this, and then you be in prayer for the, what could you say, Jason, thousands, millions of others like you? Say that again?
It's in the millions.
Millions. Potentially what, missing children all over the world?
Adults. I mean, you got to think, they've been ritualistically programming for decades, for about a century now, since the Nazis, and they were doing it even before that. So
yeah, you can go into old Canaanite religions and see the practices of rituals and stuff. Thank God we serve a God who will one day take this stuff and destroy it all. All the works of darkness will be destroyed by Jesus Christ. You hear me? So Jason, let's end here, brother. You have a good night, and God bless you, okay?
Bless you.